Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're covering a rapidly evolving set of global developments. From devastating strikes on Iranian soil and their far-reaching economic consequences, to critical humanitarian concerns in Gaza, escalating tensions on multiple fronts, and a landmark moment for international justice in The Hague. Let's get started. Residents of Tehran have described a harrowing night of heavy bombardment by Israeli and U.S. forces, with many saying their hearts were shaking as explosions echoed across the Iranian capital. The latest wave of attacks comes just a day after strikes on fuel reserves created massive plumes of thick, black smoke that quite literally turned day into night across parts of the city. Eyewitness accounts paint a picture of widespread fear and confusion, with civilians scrambling for shelter as the intensity of the strikes escalated through the overnight hours. The targeting of energy infrastructure has raised serious concerns about the humanitarian toll on ordinary Iranians, many of whom are already grappling with economic hardship. The bombardment marks a significant escalation in what has become an increasingly direct military confrontation between Israel, the United States, and Iran. A conflict that just weeks ago, many analysts believed could still be contained through diplomatic channels. International observers are now watching closely to see how Tehran responds, with fears growing that each new round of strikes could push the region closer to a wider, more catastrophic war. For the people of Tehran, the immediate reality is one of uncertainty, disruption, and a deepening sense of vulnerability. The World Health Organization has issued an urgent warning about so-called black rain falling over parts of Iran, a direct consequence of strikes on the country's oil facilities. When oil infrastructure burns, it releases a toxic cocktail of particulate matter, sulfur compounds, and heavy metals into the atmosphere. That contamination eventually falls back to Earth as darkened, polluted rainfall, and the WHO says it poses significant health risks to anyone exposed. Respiratory problems, skin irritation, and contamination of water supplies are among the chief concerns. The warning is particularly alarming for vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, and those with pre-existing respiratory conditions. Health officials are urging residents in affected areas to avoid exposure to rainwater, stay indoors when possible, and seek medical attention if symptoms develop. The environmental dimension of this conflict is something that often gets overlooked in the fog of war, but the WHO's intervention underscores just how far-reaching the consequences of targeting energy infrastructure can be. It's not just about military strategy, it's about the air people breathe and the water they drink. Aid organizations are now calling for immediate assessments of environmental damage, warning that the long-term health effects could persist well beyond any ceasefire. The economic shockwaves of the Iran conflict are now hitting consumers directly, with global airlines sharply increasing ticket prices as surging oil costs upend the aviation industry. The war has driven crude oil prices to levels not seen in years, and airlines, already operating on thin margins, are passing those costs straight through to passengers. On some routes, particularly those in and around the Middle East and connecting Asia to Europe, ticket prices have skyrocketed. Carriers are also rerouting flights to avoid Iranian and broader Middle Eastern airspace, adding fuel burn, flight time, and operational complexity. It's a ripple effect that illustrates how a regional conflict can quickly become a global economic problem. Business travelers and vacationers alike are feeling the pinch, and industry analysts warn that if oil prices remain elevated, we could see further fare increases, reduced flight frequencies, and even route cancellations. The airline industry was still recovering from pandemic-era disruptions, and this latest shock is testing its resilience once again. Economists are watching closely because rising transportation costs tend to feed into broader inflation, meaning the impact of this war could soon show up in the price of goods far beyond airline tickets. Amnesty International has released a scathing report accusing Israel of systematically denying women and girls in Gaza the basic conditions necessary to survive. The Global Human Rights Organization describes what it calls a deliberate erosion of health services, safety, and essential infrastructure, characterizing it as an intentional act of war that disproportionately targets women and girls. The report details how the destruction of hospitals, the collapse of maternal health care, and the near-total breakdown of sanitation systems have created a catastrophic environment for Gaza's female population. Women giving birth without medical assistance, girls unable to access clean water or safe shelter. These are the realities Amnesty says have become routine. The organization is calling on the international community to take immediate action, including pressing for accountability under international humanitarian law. Israel has consistently rejected such characterizations, maintaining that its military operations target militant infrastructure. But Amnesty's findings add to a growing body of evidence from multiple rights organizations documenting severe civilian harm in Gaza. The report raises uncomfortable questions about the limits of military justification and the obligations of occupying and besieging forces under international law. For the women and girls caught in this crisis, the statistics represent daily, lived suffering. The International Energy Agency is holding high-level talks as member states weigh the possibility of releasing strategic oil reserves to stabilize global markets roiled by the Iran conflict. IEA chief officials say the discussions are aimed at assessing current market conditions and determining whether coordinated action is necessary to prevent a full-blown energy crisis. Strategic petroleum reserves exist precisely for moments like this, when geopolitical disruption threatens to choke global supply. The question now is whether the situation has reached the threshold that justifies tapping into those reserves, and if so, how much oil to release and for how long. It's a delicate balancing act. Release too little and markets won't be calm. Release too much, and you deplete reserves that might be needed if the conflict worsens. The talks also reflect broader anxiety about energy security in an era of heightened geopolitical instability. European nations, which had been working to diversify away from Russian energy, now face the added challenge of disrupted Middle Eastern supply. Asian economies, heavily dependent on Iranian oil, are also feeling acute pressure. The IEA's deliberations will be closely watched by traders, governments, and consumers alike, as the outcome could have immediate implications for oil prices and, by extension, the cost of living worldwide. In Ukraine, a Russian attack on the city of Sloviansk has killed at least 4 people, a grim reminder that the war there continues to exact a devastating toll even as global attention shifts to the Middle East. Both Ukrainian and Russian officials have claimed battlefield successes in recent days, though independent verification of those claims remains difficult. The conflict, now stretching past 4 years, has settled into a grinding pattern of attrition, with neither side able to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Sloviansk, located in the eastern Donetsk region, has been a frequent target throughout the war, and its residents have endured years of shelling and displacement. The latest attack underscores the persistent danger facing civilians and frontline communities. On the broader strategic front, Ukraine continues to press Western allies for sustained military and financial support, while Russia shows no signs of scaling back its operations. The war in Ukraine may no longer dominate daily headlines the way it once did, but the human cost remains staggering. Tens of thousands dead, millions displaced, and entire cities reduced to rubble. As the world grapples with the crisis in Iran, it's essential not to lose sight of the ongoing suffering in Ukraine, where families continue to bury their loved ones with no end to the fighting in sight. Israel has released dramatic video footage, it says, shows the moment a missile fired by Hezbollah struck a satellite and radar station on Israeli territory. The footage, which has been widely circulated, captures the missile's impact on what appears to be a significant piece of military surveillance infrastructure. If confirmed, the strike represents a notable tactical achievement for Hezbollah, demonstrating the group's ability to target and damage high-value Israeli defense assets. Israel's decision to release the video is itself noteworthy. It may be intended to build public and international support for continued or expanded military operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The strike highlights the multi-front nature of the current conflict. While the primary focus has been on Iran, Hezbollah, long considered Iran's most capable proxy force, continues to pose a serious and direct threat to Israeli security from the north. The group's missile arsenal has been a source of concern for Israeli military planners for years, and this incident suggests that despite ongoing Israeli operations in Lebanon, Hezbollah retains significant offensive capability. Military analysts say the targeting of radar and satellite infrastructure is particularly concerning because it could degrade Israel's ability to detect and intercept incoming threats. The incident adds another volatile dimension to an already complex and dangerous regional conflict. Thousands of miles from the Middle East, a different kind of reckoning is unfolding at The Hague, where the International Criminal Court is set to deliver a landmark judgment on the Philippines' brutal drug war under former President Rodrigo Duterte. For years, victims and their families have sought justice for what human rights organizations have described as a campaign of extrajudicial killings that claimed thousands of lives. Under Duterte's leadership, Philippine police and vigilante groups carried out widespread lethal operations against suspected drug users and dealers, often in impoverished communities, with little recourse to legal protection. The ICC's involvement came after the Philippines withdrew from the court's jurisdiction, a move critics said was designed to shield Duterte from accountability. However, The court ruled it retained jurisdiction over crimes committed during the period of membership. This case is being watched closely around the world, not just for what it means for the Philippines, but for what it signals about the reach and relevance of international justice. If the ICC moves forward with formal charges or arrest warrants, it would send a powerful message that leaders cannot escape accountability simply by withdrawing from international institutions. For the families of victims, many of whom lost sons, daughters, and parents in nighttime raids, this moment represents something they were told might never come, a genuine path to justice. As the conflict with Iran intensifies, a pointed question is gaining traction among geopolitical analysts. Is control of Iran's vast natural resources a factor in U.S. strategic calculations? Iran sits atop some of the world's largest proven oil and natural gas reserves, and it serves as a key energy supplier to China, America's primary strategic competitor. Critics argue that the resource dimension of this conflict cannot be ignored, pointing to historical precedents where energy interests have shaped U.S. military engagement in the Middle East. Proponents of the current U.S. approach counter that the operations are driven by legitimate security concerns, including Iran's nuclear program and its support for proxy forces across the region. But the question persists. If Iran's energy infrastructure is degraded or its exports disrupted, the geopolitical implications are enormous. China loses a critical supplier, global energy markets are reshaped, and whoever influences the reconstruction or future governance of Iran's energy sector stands to gain significant strategic leverage. It's a conversation that touches on some of the most uncomfortable intersections of military power and economic interest. Whatever the motivations behind current U.S. policy, the reality is that Iran's natural resources make it a prize of immense strategic value, and that reality inevitably colors how nations calculate their interests in this conflict. Tonight we've covered an extraordinary range of developments, from the devastating bombardment of Tehran and its environmental and economic fallout, to the humanitarian crisis facing women in Gaza, escalating multi-front tensions involving Hezbollah, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and a historic moment for international justice at The Hague. These are consequential times, and we'll continue bringing you the full picture. Thank you for watching, and good night.